Good afternoon, everyone. One of the things that I do in our department is I do new initiatives, programs, I troubleshoot issues. So some of my colleagues came back several years ago and said, hey, we heard these programs got STEM certification for their master's program. Can you look into that? Sure, I'll look into it. So I called these programs, and I think the one might have been, as I was sitting over there listening to everybody, I was trying to think who was the school, and I think it was Syracuse. And I chatted with the program director there, and they said, oh, it was easy. We just got a change in our CIP code. I'm like, CIP code, okay. So this started us down a little bit of a rabbit hole at the university. As you can imagine, Michigan State is big and very big. And so now it was CIP codes. Okay, so what are CIP codes? And that's why I started my slide, which is some general information about CIP codes, because I didn't know anything about CIP codes. So if anyone else is in the same shoes that I was in, the CIP codes are important because the Department of Homeland Security has certain CIP codes on their clearance, right? So if you are in one of these CIP codes, then you are considered a STEM program. Okay, so then it was, well, what CIP code are we, and how do you get to be another CIP code? And my colleagues that I talked to at Syracuse will say, well, we just went to our whatever office and they changed our CIP code. Okay, easy enough. So I'm like, well, wait a minute, who's the keeper of our CIP codes, right? I had no idea. So I started asking around, nobody knows anything about this. I happened to be on a committee. It was our university healthcare committee. And one of the people on that committee, this is the power of networking, right? We all know and we tell our students this. So I'm sitting next to the director of our Office of Planning and Budgets. And I said, Dave, do you know about CIP codes? Oh yeah, that falls under our office. And he says, that's, this person is in charge of those. And I'm like, oh, okay. And he said, so, reach out to her and get a meeting. So now I know who the keeper of Michigan State University's CIP codes. Now, for some of you, maybe you know who that is, or maybe you're going to have to go on this little bit of a wild goose chase trying to find that out. At a big school, that took me quite a while. That was kind of a lengthy process. So now I know. So myself and our associate dean, we go. At Michigan State, we have the Red Cedar River that runs through the campus, and the administration building, which is where the Office of Planning and Budgets is across the river. So, that's like going, how you hear the jokes about the dark side, if you get into administration and all that. Well, for us to cross the river, it's like, oh boy, I got to cross the river. So we had to cross the river to go over and talk with this woman over in our Office of Planning and Budgets. So we go over and we say, we'd like to change our CIP code. And she looked at us like we were crazy, right? She goes, what do you mean you want to change your CIP code? Well, we understand that you are the office that assigns CIP codes to programs, and we want ours to be different. And so then she just looked at us like we were crazy, and we explained what we were trying to accomplish, and she said, well, prove it that you should be a different CIP code. And we're like, prove it? And she says, you've got to prove it. She said, because we're not going to change your CIP code just because you say you're going to change a CIP code. So we're like, okay. So then that's where the real work began. We first had to investigate the CIP codes and which ones classify right in the STEM disciplines. And there's several that could be applicable to your programs. We chose the 52.1399 code, which is Management Sciences and Quantitative Methods, other, whatever the other is, I'm not sure. So that's the one that we thought fit our program. We then had to do some homework, though, about that code, and you can actually review the requirements of those codes. So you can go in and you can find your codes and investigate, and it gives you some details about if you will fall under that code, these are some of the things that you should be covering, right? So it gives you some detail. So then we had to go, now we're going to prove it, right? And I don't know about all of you folks, but we have this cumbersome process when you develop a course. You have to go through the governance process, and that starts in your department, then it goes to the college level, then it goes across the river again, and then it goes through that governance process, and then it gets approved, right? So when you get that through, I mean, you know, you don't often visit that course again in terms of the official paperwork that you had to do when you first developed that course. So this woman in planning and budget, part of her prove it process was, if I looked up your course, so we have a form and you have to put all this information in and you have to list the topics. So if we haven't revisited that in 15 years for a particular course, you can imagine what those topics were 15 years ago, right? And they're not necessarily what you're doing today in that course. So we had to go back through all of our graduate courses, pull up those courses. Our master's program committee did that. We went back through, we met with all the faculty, and we revised every single course form. And so that it reflected what it was we were currently doing, and that it reflected the skills that are needed and the subjects that you need to be covering in order to be 52.1399 other, right? So that was a long process. I mean, this was our faculty meeting, the committee meeting, then it has to go through that process again. So now we have changed all of our courses. It has to go through the governance process. So after all of those were changed, our faculty had to vote, the college had to vote, then across the river again, right? So this took, oh gosh, probably almost 2 years for all of this to be done. So we got all of those done, but the person, our keeper of the codes, that wasn't enough. We had to go through all of our promotional materials and our website. Now you will understand her concern though. She was afraid if the IPEDS folks, and if the federal government audited our programs, and if they went out onto the web and read about it or picked up a brochure someplace, would those materials reflect what we say we're doing in our course? So now we've changed all our courses, but now we're like, okay, so now we're digging around where there's any information about our program, and we're changing that. So, brochures, websites, we had to get that all in order. So once we got all of that done, we had to send a proposal. You know, our dean actually had our associate dean, our chairperson to our associate dean to our dean, then wrote a letter of support for changing and requesting that our CIP code be changed. And we did it. It was a huge team effort. I started the process with my digging around, but I need to give credit to all of my colleagues that are not here, but I still feel like I really need to give them credit because it was a huge heavy lift to go through the curriculum process in order to do it. So Bob and Michelle and MICPA folks, if you can get this done automatically for all of us, yay, 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 that would be really something. But I thought it was interesting that your institution owns the assignment of CIP codes, and I didn't know that. So that's our story.